In North America, one soldier wrote that thirst was worse than fear. In Eastern Europe, men dug with bare hands through frozen mud, not for shelter, but for a single drop. During World War II, when the ground gave nothing and the skies stayed dry, survival didn't depend on weapons. It depended on water. But the wells failed, rivers froze, and taps, where they existed, ran brown or not at all. What came next wasn't strategy, it was instinct. Soldiers didn't wait for orders. They siphoned dew from metal sheets, filtered puddles through socks, boiled snow with bits of wire. Some even collected steam from tin can lid, drop by precious drop. They didn't call it hydration. They called it one more hour alive. Today, we uncover 9 forgotten water hacks soldiers used in the deadliest corners of war. When thirst wasn't discomfort, it was death in slow motion. Hit like and subscribe, because survival didn't come from strength. It came from remembering where to look when nothing was left. Number 1. Raincatcher helmets. When the skies opened and the earth was parched, soldiers couldn't wait for rain. They had to chase it, and they did using helmets. In World War II fields, steel helmets weren't just armor. They became water collectors. Raincatcher helmets were more than improvisation. They were lifeline. Imagine standing in battle-scarred trenches, skies heavy with monsoon or storm clouds, no canteen refill in weeks. One metal dome turned palm up, caught drops. Minute by minute, droplets pooled, then streamed. Metal's cold curve held water that would otherwise disperse or evaporate. Soldiers learned fast. Tilt matters. Angle the helmet just right so each rain burst slides to the rim. Then cup both hands, pour it into ration tins or ground hollows lined with cloth. The cloth caught grit, keeping sediment from spoiling cold sips later. Helmets were carried everywhere, for drills, patrols, rest. When rain threatened, men dropped their packs, flipped helmets skyward in unison. A sudden shower, 5 drops here, 10 there, enough after 30 minutes to wet parched lips, enough after an hour to cook roots or boil bark. In arid Mediterranean fronts, burnished steel glowed in sun but betrayed night movement. So rain catchers were lined with leaves or moss. These absorb moisture, release slowly into the helmet bowl. Moss also filtered debris. Tiny bits of leaf or soil stayed behind while water poured clean. Sometimes helmets were suspended over shelters during storms, braced against poles. Drip lines formed as rain ran along brim, funneled into containers below. Buckets, mess tins, even hollow logs. Improvised spouts carved from wood helped guide flow. No design, no blueprint, only urgency. Accuracy grew with necessity. Men memorized cloud patterns and seasonal showers. They asked, which cliff holds clouds first? Where does wind carry moisture? They moved their vantage points, habitually carrying helmets toward high ground before rain hit. Every drop mattered. Numerous times, images show soldiers bathing with helmets full or using lids to catch rain for drinking. These weren't rare acts. They were daily survival strategy. Rust never stopped water. War noise never stopped rain. Helmets did both jobs, protect and collect. When nothing else remained, no wells, no rivers, raincatcher helmets gave cold comfort. They gave drink. They gave reason to stand another dawn. One soldier once wrote, "My helmet tasted like sky." Number 2. Plant stalk tapping wells ran dry, and skies stayed stubbornly blue. Soldiers looked sideways towards plants. They discovered that not all stems were empty. Some held moisture inside like living pipes. This is plant stalk tapping. It began in damp valleys where stalks of reeds, grass, or hollow bamboo stood tall. Moisture gathers inside living stalk tissue overnight. Each hollow plant, if cut just right, could drip precious liquid at dawn. Soldiers observed dew collecting on stalk tops. They'd mark the lowest joints, then at first light, slice just above them. Water trickled slowly, drop by drop. Enough to wet lips, enough to treat thirst for moments. They learned which species worked best. Reeds, near marshes. Bamboo, along stream edges. Certain grasses in humid forests. Those had spongy interior channels that held moisture. Technique required caution. A bad cut spoiled it. Too close to soil. and bacteria ruined taste. Too high on stalk, and sunlight evaporated what remained. Some carried small blades just to score stalks carefully. Once they gathered enough, they filtered through cloth or leaf to catch debris, tiny plant fibers, dirt, bits of bark. Raw water inside plants is sharper to the tongue, but filtered stalk water often relieved burning throats. In Greece, soldiers foraging in olive groves used wild fennel stalks. In jungle fronts in Asia, they used bamboo joints to suck moisture directly. In winter forests, frozen stalks were warmed briefly near tattered fires before tapping, to thaw internal moisture. It wasn't comfort. It was concession to desperation. Each stalk end was squeezed with hands or teeth, coaxing out every drop. When squads marched all day without water, they paused at marshy patches, not to drink from mud, but to find stalks. Skill improved with time. Men memorized plant shapes, learned colony patches where moisture pooled below soil, avoided stalks infested with insects. If a stalk tasted bitter, they discarded it immediately. This method wasn't ideal, but it worked when nothing else remained. A handful of stalk sap could ease cramps. A few drips could stave off hallucination. A moment's relief before ration passed or night fell. They didn't call it innovation, they called it survival coated in green, wood, and water. Number 3. Morning roof condensation. When night fell and temperatures dropped, roofs cooled first. Steel, tile, wood, whatever covered the barracks, huts, or ruined shacks, became colder than the air above. Dew gathered, moisture settled. Then, just before dawn, soldiers reached out. This is morning roof condensation. They learned that when roof surfaces cooled through the night, warm, humid air from breath, damp blankets, cooking fires condensed into droplets by early morning. Those beads hung on rafters, curled over tin sheets, dangled on eaves. Gravity, darkness, patience, they all played their part. In torn frontline shelters, men tied cloth strips to beams. These cloths soaked dew the way sponge soaked water. They squeezed them into cups. Tin mess pails held enough for one swallow, enough to wet swollen lips, enough to steady shaking hands before roll call. Metal roofs, especially corrugated steel, were prized. Their ridges cooled quickly. Cold edges drew vapor. Dew condensed better on those ridges. Soldiers braced pots or cans beneath them when clouds threatened. Even minimal dripping off a nail or screw was caught, collected under lids, in hollows, in cracks where two planks met. In winter weeks, frost sometimes formed. Thin, fragile sheets shimmering on roofs come sunrise. Those melted first. That water they captured as if it were medicine. They ate frozen bits, melted them over weak fires. Those small acts carried hope. Some improvised gutters, strips of canvas, tin fragments nailed at eaves, to guide dripping water into small containers placed outside bunks. Early risers knew time mattered. Once sun-touched roof, condensation evaporated. Roofs warmed, drops gone, the chance lost. Shaded spots, under overhangs, beneath trees, behind collapsed walls, were precious. Those areas stayed cool longer, more dew, more moisture. Those places became gathering points at dawn. No one taught this in manuals. No orders issued to harvest dew. But necessity made teachers of desperation. Silence carried wisdom. Waking at first light became ritual. Often, a soldier would share dew water with wounded. Another would trade container fill for extra ration crust. Sometimes, just the act of catching dew, hands cold but moving, reminded a man he had power over nothing, yet still held something. They weren't just extracting water. They were extracting life. At first light, when every drop glistened under pale sky, it was more than moisture. It was defiance. It was survival dressed in dew. Number 4. Herb-infused filtration. In World War II, they didn't have filters. No tablets, no chemical drops, just muddy puddles, broken canteens, and hope. But some soldiers, those who'd listened, who'd learned from old villagers or passed down traditions, carried one forgotten trick: herb-infused filtration. Not for flavor, for survival. Out in the field, clean water was rare. Streams were often tainted, collected rainwater still or stagnant. But when men had access to wild herbs, like pine needles, thyme, or wild mint. They didn't just drink water over them. They passed water through them. Here's how it worked. A soldier would take his sock, a bandage, or a strip of shirt. Into it, he'd pack crushed herbs. Anything with natural antiseptic or antiparasitic properties. Pine needles, when bruised, released compounds that didn't just mask smell. They neutralized bacteria on a small scale. Thyme and mint weren't luxury. They were frontline medicine. Once packed, this crude filter was placed over the mouth of a mess tin or bottle. Water was poured through slowly, very slowly. The fabric caught larger sediment. The herbs inside acted as a biological barrier, reducing microbial load and improving taste, just enough to drink and move on. It wasn't purification in the modern sense, but it was better than drinking straight from a trench puddle. One French partisan shared how his mother taught him to filter water through mint and coal from the stove. He did the same in the woods of occupied France. Only now, his filter was part sock, part leaf, part desperation. Another Soviet conscript carried a pouch of dried birch leaves. He chewed a few for digestion. But when stationed near a bog, he used them to wrap and strain the brown water into something his stomach could tolerate. The scent masked rot. The oils calmed nausea. The trick didn't cure, but it kept the body going. No one advertised this method. No field manual mentioned it. But in pockets, boots, helmet liners, some soldiers always kept herbs. Because they weren't just fighting bullets, they were fighting bacteria. Dysentery, fever, thirst that twisted the gut like barbed wire. And if a sock filled with mint could delay that collapse, then it was no longer just a plant. It was armor you could drink through. It wasn't science, it was instinct, wrapped in green and soaked in silence. Number 5, clay-lined puddle shelter. When wells ran dry and canteens rattled empty, soldiers turned to puddles, but not every puddle could be trusted. Most were poisoned with disease, slick with oil, or crawling with filth. That's when desperation met design, and clay became the difference between sickness and survival. It was called the clay-lined puddle shelter, a technique born not in strategy rooms but in foxholes, in places where water didn't arrive. It had to be made. Here's how they did it. First, a soldier would dig a shallow depression, just deep enough to collect rainwater or moisture runoff. Not too wide, not too deep. Then came the key, local clay, thick, sticky, yellow, or gray. With bare hands or whatever tools were around, they packed that clay tightly along the walls and bottom of the depression. Why clay? Because clay sealed. It stopped contaminants from leaching in from surrounding soil. It prevented debris, worms, and insects from creeping in. And most importantly, it slowed down evaporation, giving the soldier more time to collect, strain, and drink. Some went further. They shaped small lips around the edge, creating a basin. Others covered it with leaves or bark to block sunlight, keeping the water cooler, safer, longer. In Poland, partisans built entire networks of these puddle shelters, camouflaged beneath leaves. A drop here, a sip there. It was never enough to quench, but just enough to carry on. One British engineer, separated from his unit, survived 5 days using nothing but clay puddles and a tin cup. He marked each puddle like sacred ground, drinking only what collected slowly, letting the clay work its silent magic. Was the water clean? Never fully. But it was cleaner than the swamp, safer than the river downstream from the latrines. It was the best bad option. And in war, the best bad option often became your only lifeline. It wasn't about comfort, it was about continuity. About making water appear where none existed, by using the very earth you crawled through. In every clump of mud, they saw potential, not for shelter, not for camouflage, but for life, quiet, muddied, and just enough to keep the heart beating one more day. Number 6. Solar pasteurization wrap. In World War II, soldiers stood under sun-bleached skies, parched throats echoing their own heartbeat. Fuel was gone. Fire was dangerous. Smoke could mean discovery, but sunlight, it burned without sound. They invented a method that used nothing but heat and a simple wrap, solar pasteurization wrap. when water sources were murky, stagnant pools behind barbed wire, rusted barrels, puddles stained with oil. They couldn't risk boiling. Fuel shortages, enemy patrols, risk of exposure, all threats. So they turned to solar energy. They found old glass panes, broken window shards, lens fragments from shattered binoculars. They gathered transparent plastic sheets where possible, hides from tents, or even limp oilcloths scraped clean. Cloth wraps soaked in water became another tool. They figured, trap sunlight, trap heat. Here's how they did it. First, a container of dirty water, tin can, enamel cup, whatever was usable, was wrapped tightly in soaked cloth or plastic. Then exposed to direct sunlight, often placed on a reflective surface, broken mirror, polished metal, or tin lid. Wrap heated up slowly. Sunlight passed through wrap, warmed water. Heat stayed trapped inside wrap. Internal temperature rose. If wrapped right, tight, sealed, water heated to around 65 to 70 degrees Celsius, enough to kill many bacteria without boiling. Just enough. It was pasteurization, not full boil. Solar still methods, solar water disinfection, uses heat and UV. Morning was best. Angle mattered. Exposed to sun for hours. Wraps repositioned. Cold shade cleaned off. Those who mastered it soiled the cloth with charcoal or dark ash to absorb more heat. Hang wraps over tin lids to elevate. Avoid shadows. They didn't claim purity, but this method reduced sickness. Guts calmed. Fevers delayed. Every drop safer than straight puddle water. One soldier recorded surviving a desert march by drinking wrap pasteurized water every morning for 3 days. He said the bitter taste reminded him of clean meals. Another said wrap saved his fellow in camp after their canteens dried up. This hack wasn't taught in manual. It belonged to wisdom, passed between lips, hidden behind walls, shared quietly in barracks. Women and men both used. No uniforms needed, no spare parts required, no large fire, no smoke signaling, just sun, cloth, water, and patience. They weren't boiling water. They were buying time. They weren't expecting perfection. They were expecting dawn without death. Number 8, fabric-wrapped dew collection. In frost-kissed dawns, thirst becomes the loudest ache. Wells dry. Canteens empty. Every breath cold. But moisture still hovers on grass blades, metal sheets, rope wires. Civilians and soldiers noticed it, and they wrapped fabric around dew. They called it fabric-wrapped dew collection. First, a strip of cloth. Cotton, linen, worn shirt, even sackcloth was spread out over blades of grass, fence wires, tank surfaces, or shack roofs. Cloth thickness mattered. Thin enough to cling, thick enough to hold. Night did most work. As air cooled, humidity condensed. Tiny droplets formed on cloth surfaces. Just before sunrise, hands damp with dew were carefully lifted. Each wet patch was pressed into empty mess tins, hollows in helmets or sealed cans. They didn't drink cloth itself. They squeezed over lips, over tongue, over jars, sweat wrenching muscles, fingers numb from cold. But those drops meant more than water. They meant life pressing itself into cloth. Some wrapped lengths of fabric under tarps or shelter eaves. Others left strips strung between poles near shelter entrances. Every surface that caught dew was turned into a trap. At first light, they harvested until chill burned fingers. They learned that color of fabric mattered. Dark cloth absorbed heat faster when sun broke horizon and helped evaporate tiny dew and then recondense elsewhere. White cloth held cooler longer, but dried slower. Many layered one over the other to balance speed and capacity. In forest fronts, broad leaves underneath fabric reduced ground frost risk. In bombed housetops, tarpaulin scraps were flattened into sheets and wrapped over tubing or boards to create collection panels. Each morning became ritual, quiet, sacred, rising at first pale light, checking cloth, squeezing water, guarding every slide into thirst. People traded cloth strips. One cloth equals extra drop. One captured drop equals weaker cramps delayed. One squeezed fabric equals faint hope. It was knowledge inherited from fields, farms, folk, not from generals. Survivors recorded that dew collection this way reduced sickness from drinking pooled water, cloth filtering dust and grit. Even small amount of fluid helped kidneys. Even small taste calmed delirium. They weren't engineers. They weren't scientists. Just desperate hands. Fabric wrapped. Dawn arrived. Water squeezed. Every drop counted. And when night again approached, cloth hung dry. Ready. Because no night too long, no dawn too weak, no drop too small. Number 9. Tin can condensation traps. Tin cans lay scattered in bombed-out bivouacs and desert camps, dented, scorched, abandoned. But when sky clouds gathered, those hollow metal bowls turned into miracles. They called this method tin can condensation trap. In silence before dawn, soldiers positioned tin cans, upright, open side, facing sky, on flat rock slabs, roofs, even vehicle hoods. Steam from every breath, mist from damp ground, vapor carried on wind, all condensed inside cold steel overnight. They didn't have glass windows. They didn't need them. As temperature dropped, vapor settled on inside surfaces of the can. Tiny droplets gathered, then rolled down sides. Thin film of metal captured them, pooled them at bottom. By morning, a few mouthfuls of water glistened, caught without boiling, enough to wet lips, calm dryness, and delay collapse. Skill came with practice. Men learned to cover cans with inverted lids at night, just enough to trap dew, prevent rain from contaminating. Cloth wraps sometimes lined bottom to filter grit. When moonlight glinted off steel, they knew condensation had begun. Camps and jungles used canopy leaves to drip water into cans. Tent roofs and frozen fields acted as collectors. They placed cans under humid shelter eaves, where breath, fog, and damp wood all contributed. One sergeant, stranded behind enemy lines, survived 3 days drinking nothing but trap water, collected this way. He carried 2 large cans in his pack, even when rations failed, because he knew steel could hold moisture even when ground lay parched. There were dangers: mold, metal rust, small insects drowned in collected water. Many filtered over cloth or heated cans briefly when fire was safe. Taste bitter, smell metallic, but drinkable. Better than muddy stream or nothing at all. Soldiers traded tin cans like treasure. A man without one begged neighbors. A captured can became lifeline. Memory of cold steel beneath sky haunted them, yes, but also reminded each morning that survival hung in smallest things. They weren't engineers. They weren't alchemists. Just men made desperate by thirst. Every drop from tin can traps was hard-won. Each mouth full earned by shivering hands, by patience, by listening to whispers of fog. Because when wells fail, when rivers vanish, when every source dries up, metal and morning air still breathe life. Number 9. Tin can condensation traps. Tin cans lay scattered in bombed-out bivouacs and desert camps, dented, scorched, abandoned. But when sky clouds gathered, those hollow metal bowls turned into miracles. They called this method tin can condensation trap. In silence before dawn, soldiers positioned tin cans, upright, open side, facing sky, on flat rock slabs, roofs, even vehicle hoods. Steam from every breath, mist from damp ground, vapor carried on wind, all condensed inside cold steel overnight. They didn't have glass windows. They didn't need them. As temperature dropped, vapor settled on inside surfaces of the can. Tiny droplets gathered, then rolled down sides. Thin film of metal captured them, pooled them at bottom. By morning, a few mouthfuls of water glistened, caught without boiling, enough to wet lips, calm dryness, and delay collapse. Skill came with practice. Men learned to cover cans with inverted lids at night, just enough to trap dew, prevent rain from contaminating. Cloth wraps sometimes lined bottom to filter grit. When moonlight glinted off steel, they knew condensation had begun. Camps and jungles used canopy leaves to drip water into cans. Tent roofs and frozen fields acted as collectors. They placed cans under humid shelter eaves, where breath, fog, and damp wood all contributed. One sergeant, stranded behind enemy lines, survived 3 days drinking nothing but trap water, collected this way. He carried 2 large cans in his pack even when rations failed because he knew steel could hold moisture even when ground lay parched. There were dangers: mold, metal rust, small insects drowned in collected water. Many filtered over cloth or heated cans briefly when fire was safe. Taste bitter, smell metallic, but drinkable. Better than muddy stream or nothing at all. Soldiers traded tin cans like treasure. A man without one begged neighbors. A captured can became lifeline. Memory of cold steel beneath sky haunted them, yes, but also reminded each morning that survival hung in smallest things. They weren't engineers. They weren't alchemists. Just men made desperate by thirst. Every drop from tin can traps was hard won. Each mouthful earned by shivering hands, by patience, by listening to whispers of fog. Because when wells fail, when rivers vanish, when every source dries up, metal and morning air still breathe life. These weren't survivalists by choice. They were people, caught in a world that forgot them. And still, they turned sand into filters, cloth into catchers, sunlight into water. They looked at a battlefield and found life hidden in puddles, leaves, and tin. It wasn't just resourcefulness. It was rebellion against death. And that's what makes this history powerful. Because maybe you'll never be in a trench. Maybe your well won't run dry. But knowing what they knew, how to pull survival from scraps, is a kind of inheritance, one we can't afford to lose. So if this story moved you, if you believe these forgotten water hacks deserve to be remembered, not buried, hit that subscribe button. Not for me. For the ones who never got to tell their stories. For the hands that turned ash, heat, and cloth into hope. Comment below if your parents or grandparents passed down similar survival tricks. We're collecting memory. We're preserving legacy. Because when the world gets quiet, these are the voices we'll need.